My name is Nico Maas. I'm a trained IT Systemelektroniker from Computer Center University of Saarbrücken. Did my Bachelor of Science at the Hochschule in Saarbrücken, and I'm just writing my master thesis in informatics here at the University at Trier. You can find the slides on nicomaas.de, and you can follow me on Twitter as well if you want. And this little nice QR code, which is in the upper side, always links to the current presentation I'm holding. So if you would want to just like click it, then you can go there as well. Okay, we start with an introduction with some basic projects which you can do with the Raspberry Pi. Then I'm going to talk a lot about the history of the Pi because, well, it's been around for some years, and kind of like this here is some kind of like history lecture about the Pi, to be true. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the hardware and the software, so basic operation system you get for this, and yeah, what you can do with it. And first steps if you want to buy and use a Pi. Okay. No, this thing breaks. No, it doesn't. Just thought it broke as well. So you can do a lot of things with the Raspberry Pi, which is currently the first version. Basically, Pi was introduced to get people to programming, into programming. And so there are some stuff like Scratch, which gives you a quick introduction into programming with some basic drag and drop programming techniques. But you can do a lot of other stuff as well with the Pi, like building your own media player or media center. You can use it as some gaming console in, yes, it's quite neat form factor. You can use it as a supercluster. Well, it basically does not have the compute power of a supercluster, but you can use it in that fact that you can just like buy 32 Pis or something like that, stuff them together, and work with the same software. You could actually work on a real cluster system, but the price point is quite more neat than a real supercluster. So that works as well. So MPI or something like that works quite well. You can use it for scientific research in kind of like ocean cameras. So they're not real cameras, they're just like measuring temperatures and stuff like that, but called that way. A lot of toys, well, quite more toys having it in it, like the Xiphius. It's kind of like some water drone you can just like play around with your Android or iOS phone. Garage opener, access control in a more, let's say, industrial and robust way as a real product. Cat feeder or dog feeder. You can use it as root server. Art projects are powered by Raspberry Pis. Actually had one in Tokyo with a friend, which was really cool. So yeah, you can really find it in some nice vernissages today. You can use it as an interactive dartboard. Funny thing is the picture is actually from the now not here anymore IT security labor, and Daniel Fett did build this. So the guy with the short hair just minutes ago. A Game Girl, which is the Raspberry Pi version of the Game Boy. And yeah, you can build your own cell phone, but it's not that sleek in terms of form factor. Okay. Raspberry Pi started with these both persons, Ian Upton and Liz Upton, or now Liz Upton, because they're married. And the idea of the Raspberry Pi was, or the problem was that most people, or let's cut it short. Ibn Upton worked at Cambridge University, and he saw that the number of persons going into IT were declining. So a lot of the people which joined studies for university did not choose IT anymore, which is kind of like interesting because most people think, yeah, they are all going to IT or something like that, which is sadly not true. And he thought about the reasons why people weren't joining IT anymore, and that is because the students did not have any kind of relation to PCs anymore. They were just like using them, kind of like I'm using my app on my iPhone or my Android, I'm using Facebook, I'm using Instagram and stuff like that, but I didn't do anything. I have no kind of like bound to my IT hardware, kind of like the stuff he did in his childhood where he was like playing with his Commodore 64 and stuff like that, was building around, programming its own stuff, hacking, and that's the thing that's missing now for the current generation. And he was thinking about how could I improve on that, and that was the basic idea of the Raspberry Pi, giving them a cheap, accessible computer which they can just like hack around with, add some LEDs, learn to program, basically do stuff you could do at his time, but with a little bit more processing power. And that's a lesson he learned rather late, because the first Raspberry Pi prototype, 2006, was an Atmega processor. Was using an Atmega processor, which is kind of more like a Commodore 64 equivalent. So that's not really kind of like giving you some nice crispy HDMI pictures of your, it's more like another thing. And he was thinking about building it, and it was quite a neat form factor, but the problem was he was just like, okay, if I'm giving this thing out to students or pupils, and then they're going to use it for kind of like, the curriculum, if they must use it, and then they're going to throw that away or in the bin or something like that, they don't care because it was not cool or didn't do anything nice in terms of user interface and stuff like that. So he joined Broadcom, and Broadcom is building CPUs for mobile phones and stuff like that. He found this nice crispy BCM 28335, and that's a nice processor because the fact is it includes also a graphics unit, and this graphics unit can put out HDMI. And it's kind of fast as well, so the first version was clocked at 700 megahertz and had 256 megabytes of RAM. That was the idea. But at the time they launched the Raspberry Pi, they doubled the RAM because it was affordable at that moment. And kind of launching, 2012 did the Raspberry Pi launch, in terms of that they had 10 boards which they gave away on eBay, and it was for quite a nice price. But it was a good thing because these 10 boards they just like supplied there were for charity, so it was a good thing. The real supply began when Farnell and RS did give them away in 2012 and 29th of February. And at that morning, the website of both Farnell and RS just like went down, and I was one of these idiots which were kind of like awake at 5 o'clock in the morning, hammering their F5 keys and just like, oh, I want one. And they were just like, okay, we're never going to sell more than 100,000 pieces of them because, well, no one will really care, will be used for education, but, well, and then the whole Maker and Hackerspace Association came along and said, oh, that's a nice thing. And, they just like, kind of went over the idea of what they thought they would sell at that morning. So the Raspberry Pi was short in supply for to say it, and at the end of 2012 they kind of changed the basic design already a lot because they added a little bit more RAM, so 512 megabytes in terms of the earlier versions with 256. And they introduced the Model A, which is a really interesting model because that one was stripped bare bones in terms of it hadn't had any Ethernet connection, it had only one USB connection, and it was a lot cheaper. But it was interesting because a lot of people actually bought that model as well because it was, you do not need Ethernet for every project, and that thing was really nice for kind of like weather balloons and stuff like that where the weight counts. So 2012 was really nice for the Raspberry Pi Foundation, but 2013 was better because they could actually sell for the first time their Raspberry Pi cameras. And these ones were actually interesting because of the fact that they could just like interface directly with the graphics unit. And with that thing, they could actually record HDMI, HD videos and photographs, even though the Raspberry Pi only had 700 megahertz at that moment. So that was a nice thing. As well, Wolfram came along with their Mathematica software and gave it along for free. So at that moment, you could actually use Mathematica, which is kind of expensive. And it's pre-installed on every Raspberry Pi until this moment. 2014 was interesting because a lot of industrial suppliers and customers got their attention with the Raspberry Pi Compute module, which was a Raspberry Pi in a more industrial form factor, and they could just like slip it into their product and use it. We had 2014 as well with the Model B+, and that's a new form factor which you see now. So the Raspberry Pi Model 3 and Raspberry Pi 2, they all use this form factor. And the GPIO pins were kind of like, they added a lot of them. So that's the form factor you're using actually at the moment. And the Model A was re-released as well as A+. So that kind of like shrunk together as well. So in 2015 we had the Raspberry Pi Model 2, or Raspberry Pi 2, which was interesting of that fact because it was the first quad-core processor they had. And it weren't built really much, so I think some people bought it, but the fact that the Raspberry 3 came actually 1 year later and added a little bit more computational power to that, more people went for that case after that. So in 2015 they added the displays, so there was an actual display which is currently available to buy with a touchscreen as well, and it plugs directly into the Raspberry Pi into a special socket there and gives you a nice crispy image. As well, there was another interesting addition because of this Astro Pi mission, which is actually a mission they did with the International Space Station, the ISS. So the English people came together and could solve some problems, or actually perform some experiments, which they then uploaded to the ISS and did there as well with 2 Raspberry Pis they had kind of like floating around there. And that was a really nice thing, because it kind of like showed their gave a little bit more whistle to the space program of the UK. And the really shining thing of the year at that time was the Raspberry Pi Zero, which kind of was a big surprise, because it was the first Raspberry Pi which came out at a really competitive price point. So you got a Pi Zero for $5, which is kind of interesting for a whole computer. But the problem is, as well, it's not kind of like easy to use, because you only got one usable USB port, which you have to get out there with some adapters and a special mini HDMI, which not everyone possesses and stuff like that. So $5 is not really the real price, but for kind of like hackers and figures as well, this was a nice product. Still not really available because they kind of like producing it in small numbers, sadly, but it's an interesting product. The Raspberry Pi 3 is the current model we are just using at the moment. It's a quad core with 1.2 gigahertz, 1 gigabyte of RAM, and it features the same other kind of like peripherals the first version also featured. So we both have the USB 2, 4 of them, plugs, we have fast Ethernet, we have HDMI, we have the GPIO pins with the plus factor, so a little bit more added. And we got these special adapters as well for the display and for the camera. As well, there is a special connector which accepts special cables which can give out audio as well as video, so cinch video. And yeah, you got as well the power connector. And which is interesting as well, the Raspberry Pi 3 also features Bluetooth and Wi-Fi directly on board. So it's kind of a cool thing. And at that moment in 2016, they already had 8 million Pis sold. So kind of a lot of people interested in that. Yeah, and if we come to the end of 2016, we also had the addition of some additional software. So SLAS, or SUSE Linux Enterprise Server, joined Raspberry Pi and made a special version for that, so you can use that as well. We hit the 10 million sold Pi factor. Chrome was added as well, so if you want to use that, you can use it as well. You can even netboot Raspberry Pis now with PXE, which is cool. And only Raspberry Pi is free, no other version allowed. The other ones do not feature the special needed memory you need for that. And interesting thing is SSH was disabled by default now, so you can enable it as well, but it does not work by default because of security reasons. Quite a lot of these Raspberry Pis were hacked in the field because people just like didn't enter any password or change it. So, where are we today? Today, 2017, we have the Compute Module version 3, so Raspberry Pi 3 for the business partners. We got the Zero V Plus, which is actually the same Zero we also had, but it adds another nice thing, the camera connector, so you can use it with camera, and it also got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in. But the price point went a little bit higher with $10, but still interesting. And you can buy these quite neatly in Germany as well, so you do not have to import them nowadays. Yeah, and the fact that it was sold quite well, so in like not 3 months, over 250,000 says, yeah, well, they kind of like that thing. Also, there was some nice addition from Google. Google did this really nice artificial intelligence do-it-yourself project, with which you can introduce the Google voice recognition and assistant programs into your Pi. And this was given away with the MacPi issue 57, which is really nice because it just like costs $5 and you had your own AI box sitting on your desk, because everything you needed with the Raspberry Pi heads and speaker and microphone, everything was included. You just like had to get your Pi on there, plug that stuff in and use it. Well, it was quite nice. So, problem is, because of all of the stuff that happened, I lost quite a lot of time, and I think we just like went to the end. So I will just like skip a little bit through that. You can access the whole thing on the internet. So the nice thing about the Pi is the Gpio Port, which actually gives you kind of the connection to all of the pins of the Pi, or the most of these, and you can use them in kind of like a digital fashion. You can use them for digital input, digital output, so you can actually plug in some kind of switch or an LED and use it by using program language. You can also plug in special sensors which use I2C bus systems or SPI or serial. So you kind of can use kind of the most of the interesting peripherals with that. And yeah, the current model, as already said, is the Raspberry Pi Model 3. And yeah, you can get it as well really, really nicely today at RS, Farnell and other vendors. And there's some flustering about Model 4 coming out soon. Why did I get 5 minutes now again? Okay. Okay, nice. I got five more minutes. Interesting. Yeah, you can. And another thing which I did not mention earlier is it's now a 64-bit core, and actually they are kind of like working on getting the Raspberry and the main software of the Raspberry Pi to 64-bit. Which is a nice thing, because you can actually use more software. These are all Raspberry Pis currently available. Available in the sense that they exist, but not that you can buy them, because some special ones like this Blue Pi, there were only built 1,000 of them and given away. So if you happen to have one of these, I want to talk to you. These red ones, I want them as well, but I'm not allowed to have them or possess them anymore, because they are just like produced for China, and they're missing the CE code. So if I would be found having these officially, it would be not so good for me. But I want them as well. So it's nice. It's kind of interesting. It's a whole family picture. And yeah, we got the cameras. In the Noir version, the Noir version has no infrared filter, so you can use them to actually build security cameras with infrared LEDs to look around in the dark. Or actually, if you are into biology, you can see, if you're looking with these cameras without infrared filter at a plant, you can see how well it's performing because of the chlorophyll which is in the plant. Some interesting stuff there. I didn't really bother. So then you get the display, and the interesting stuff which you have to know if you want to start with the Pi. Okay, the Pi comes bare bones, nothing added. So if you will at least need a power supply, you would need an micro SD card, a good one as well. So you shouldn't chimp on those both. The Pi itself has no real-time clock, so it will lose time and date if you just like unplug it. And another thing is, that's kind of not interesting anymore today, because they worked on that. In the earlier times, you should not plug in external hard drives or something like that to the Pi, because the Pi wouldn't like that. But nowadays, you can just like plug in what you want. Actually, Western Digital builds special hard drives for the Raspberry Pi, which are plugged in. Software-wise, you got the best thing you can use is Raspbian, because that's kind of a Debian derivative, and it's the official Raspberry Pi software. So that's the thing you get the most support for in the Raspberry Pi forums as well. But you're free to use anything you want. We got a special version of Ubuntu. We got, in the earlier times, we got Pydora, which is Fedora, and Arch. but they are not supported anymore, I think not officially. We got some special software for media players like OpenALEC or SMC. Risk OS, if you're really into something new and have kind of like played them all, you can use that. It's interesting. I just like had to admit I was using old Macintosh from 1987 and other stuff I was playing around with, but that thing was really new. So if you want to see something really different, try that. And we got a bunch of other stuff for special things as well. So from Gpio for real-time operations, Android, Firefox OS, which is kind of dead now, I think, at that point in time, sadly, and Kali Linux, OpenWT. Yeah, and the really special ones, like Snappy Ubuntu Core for IoT, Windows 10 IoT Core. So it's really only for IoT, you do not get any desktop. So don't think about that. And SLES. So, interesting stuff you have to know. Raspberry-Pi.org, that's where you find everything. They also got the official forums and you get a lot of support there. And you also get the downloads there. So that's the first site you want to click if you want to get anything. Also, there's an official support wiki, which includes all the infos and bits you need to know. And I think I already told you that. So, yeah, Raspberry-Pi.org is basically the one link you have to know, and the rest comes after that. Tons of magazines which are covering Pis now. Same thing goes for books as well. And the best thing to actually experience Raspberry Pis is this. Come to Raspberry Pi jams like the Pi and More, get to know the people, talk to them, look at their projects, have some fun, and, well, just get into it. So, with any further ado, I think I'm now really run out of time. So, I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and have a nice day.